Okay, welcome back. So we're going to pick up by talking about apocalyptic thinking. I'm looking at my notes here and I realize that there are a few things that I want to hit again in terms of Hellenization. And one thing that I say here is that uh, we want to look at the culture of the time of Jesus, and part of Hellenization is agreeing with the culture of Greece, and part of it is agreeing with the power of Rome. And we cannot underestimate the role that Greece and Rome had in reshaping these reactionaries, whether we're talking about the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Zealots, whichever one of those four groups, and there are others, there are multiple other groups that we could point to, but those are the big four that we would want to point to in reaction to Hellenization. We cannot underestimate the role that Greece and Rome had in building this reactionary response from these groups. Rome conquers Greece, as we've talked about. And when Rome does this, they are trying to build roads, they're trying to build waterways, they're trying to build what we would probably call traveling roads or commerce across the entire region, which is a good thing for a lot of reasons. And so we don't want to undersell that or underestimate that. But with all of this, Rome also doesn't want to change a whole lot. They're not trying to force change unless people are fighting. And when they're fighting, that's something that's got to be shut down. And so anytime that we have a zealot or these extremists reappearing in a region, Rome will shut the entire region down and will force everyone to comply. Even if you already complied, they will force your compliance if you try and fight back, if you try and resist. In other ways, however, that are reshaping the identity of the Jewish people and are bringing the debates and the questions that we see Jesus responding to, answering, hinting at, is that Greece was very permissive in their approach to relationships and marriage. They, for all kinds of ways that you may be interested in exploring, but with Greece comes an acceptance of sexual practices and relationship practices that the Jewish people are very much against. And so when you are Hellenized, when you are becoming one of the Hellenized individuals, this means that you're not just trying to make minor concessions. You're making complete overhauls of what is clearly laid out in the Torah without consideration of the Torah, but in many ways just kind of going along because it's easier for you and not for the community, but for you. And I think for pretty obvious reasons, you can see why other individuals would reject that. I would say in my own family, there are individuals within my own family who think that if the government does it, no matter what the political party is, if the government is doing a thing, that's right. And I'll have to say, where are you getting this from? I believe this and I believe this, and it's all about America, it's all about nationalism. And whether that is or is not a good idea, what frustrates me is that they don't even question the idea. They just say, because the American government does it, it's good. And when I press them on that, they might make some concessions, but then it feels to me that those conversations always kind of snap back into place, that being loyal to America is more important than their moral concerns, their ethical concerns, their religious concerns, their familiar concerns, the entire culture that I would have grown up in as a member of this family. It's almost as though all of those things are set to the side because the only thing that matters is loyalty to the nation. And that frustrates the dickens out of me. And so even on a very personal level, I can definitely see why that would be frustrating and how that would build over time into these eruptions that are taking place within Judaism. So religion, sexuality, our understandings of gender, our understandings of culture, our understandings of food and folkways, all of these are things that we are seeing these groups react to in terms of the Hellenized Jewish population. So how do we deal with the things that are coming out of the diaspora. You've been reading about the prophets and you've been reading about their reaction to the exile to Babylon. You would have seen this with people or prophets like Ezekiel and Daniel. You would have seen this even with the minor prophets who are saying things are not so great in the country. You would have seen this with people like Ezra and Nehemiah, who are kind of writing and doing things after the destruction of the temple and trying to rebuild the Jewish community. And they're saying, things are not good in the city. Things are not good in Babylon. Things are not good in these centers of power. You would have seen this with Daniel, who says, in many respects, Babylon can be a good thing. It's a good center of power. But culturally speaking, this is not what we stand for. So things are not good in the city. Things are not good out in the country. And ultimately, fast forwarding up to the time of Jesus, what has emerged is a reconsideration of the entire cosmos for the Jewish people. In the Jewish religion, we see no discussion at all of the afterlife, of heaven or hell. We just don't see that at all in early records of Judaism. And it's during this 400-year window before Jesus is on the stage that we begin to see literature, discussions, Talmudic thought, debates taking place between the Babylonian Jews and the Jews who are in Israel about what is justice. And pushing through, what we see is that justice will not come in this life. Justice will have to come in the next life. People who are evil ascend to power. People who are evil do terrible things. And the people that they are oppressing are good and bad. I mean, it's not like a dichotomy where the rich people are good and the poor people, or I should say, where the rich people are bad and the poor people are good. It's not like that. It's not so clear-cut and easily defined. It's more often like rich people, not always good. For the most part, they oppress, they harm, they seek their own interests. And poor people have to, by necessity, live in community. And you have to interrely on one another. You have to extend grace and mercy and kindness to one another. So what do you do with these people who are oppressing? Well, justice won't come in this life. We've discovered that. So justice will have to be in the hands of God, and it will have to come in the next life. Well, what is the next life? So you see some of the literature that is being recorded before the time of Jesus is referring to this place called Abraham's bosom, which the Christian community will later adopt and will reconstruct as the concept of heaven, where you are living physically in the kingdom of God, physically with God, physically, even though you yourself are a spirit, physically. And then on the other hand, you have this place of judgment, and this takes a little bit more time to develop. The good, we go pretty straight away to that. Abraham's bosom, this is a place where we are aligned with our people, with our ancestors. The goodness of God is experienced. We're not exactly sure what that means, but at least we will be at peace with God in the next life. This other place takes a little bit longer to develop, and by the time of Jesus, because the centers of power, the centers of religion are going to be in Jerusalem, in the nation of Israel, or I should say in the geographic region of Palestine, in the city of Jerusalem. There is a place that is still there. If you went to Jerusalem, you would still see it, called Gehenna, and it's basically a trash pit. If you were to go and you were to see it today, it's become more of a tourist attraction, so it's not a trash pit anymore. But at the time of Jesus, it was a trash pit. And the idea at the time of Jesus is that Gehenna, or this trash pit, exists, and that's where all the bad people are going to go. That's where all the oppressors are going to go. And here still, we're not fully done. It will take probably another 100 years for the ideas of heaven and hell to emerge from the Christian community. Jews even today in 2025 are still debating what this looks like. There is not a parallel of heaven and hell in the Jewish religion today. they would agree with it. I mean, I have yet to meet a Jew who does not have some concept of judgment. But even on this, they're still it's still very much debated. Whereas Christians are very defined in their understanding of what heaven and hell is. And the good people are always going to go to heaven, and the bad people are always going to go to hell. I would say if you think about this idea within Christian communities today, the idea is still being reshaped and still being reformed. How do I know that? Well, because we're still discussing, who's going to get into heaven and what it's going to take to get into heaven. Like, can you get in just kind of on a technicality? Do you have to always be a good person? Do you have to always put people ahead of yourself? Can you cuss and go to heaven? Do you have to do different things? Like, do you have to agree with a certain church? Do you have to speak in tongues? Do you have to give away everything that you sell to get into heaven? These are things that are still being debated. And conversely, the same debate exists in terms of hell. Who's going to go to hell? Well, okay, the bad people. Well, who's the bad people? Very much, if we press on this in Christian communities, what you will discover is that the people who say that they are Christian and who say that they are good, who say that they believe in God, they believe in Jesus, they believe the teachings of the Christian church, they still harbor fear that they too will go to the bad place, to hell. And so I think these are things that are still in flux in 2025. So we want to be generous, and we want to say, 2,000 years ago, these ideas were still very much in flux. And through all of this, whether we are talking about the good place or the bad place, what we have is a much larger umbrella called apocalyptic thought or apocalypticism. And the entire concept of apocalypticism is that at some point the world will end. And when the world ends, it will not be in peace. It will be in fire. It will be in destruction. There's a popular Robert Frost poem where he talks about how the world will end. And he says, in the poem, he says, some say that the world will end with ice, and some say that it will end with fire. And I think that when you even think about the end of the world, like, what does that look like in your head? Do you believe that the world will continue on the way that it is? And maybe we'll go to Mars, maybe we'll go to another planet, but the Earth will continue to exist in some form? Or do you think that there is a terminal point where the world will end? The world, not the world as we know it, but the world itself will stop spinning, that the sun will be extinguished. What does the end of time and the end of humanity or the human experiment, what does that look like? Will we go to space? Will it be like Star Wars, where we are marrying people or getting into relationships with other people and other planets and kind of commingling our genetics? Are we locked here? Are we basically imprisoned here? All of this, I would say, is very much under the umbrella of apocalyptic thinking, because in apocalyptic thinking, the first cause, the first movement in this entire ideology, wherever you land on concepts of heaven and hell and the future of humanity and the end of the world, all of these things are really kind of wrapped up under one big umbrella called apocalyptic thinking, because the first starting point is that the world at some point will end, and when it ends, this is what it will look like. And after it ends, here is what will happen next. And when the world ends, like, let's just kind of entertain this thought. When the world ends, however it ends, will life continue on past that point, and what will that look like? So in 2025, I could say that part of apocalyptic thinking is that humans will cease to exist. We will never leave this planet. Some of us will go to space, but you won't be there long because there's nothing to sustain you out in space. Even if you go to Mars, you won't really get past Mars because it will take too many resources to rebuild that do not exist on the planet. So, human life will cease, the sun will be extinguished, everything will grow very hot and then very cold, and that's it. That's the end of the story. On the other side of all of that, if you say, well, there is a sense of justice to the cosmos, and whether we call that God or whether we call that karma, things will kind of slingshot back and we will have some form of justice. The good people will go to the good place, the bad people will go to the bad place. All of this is under the umbrella of apocalyptic thinking. Conversely, Non-apocalyptic thinking would be to reject this entire premise and would just to not think about it at all. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's not that you're rejecting religion, it's that you're rejecting all of it. You would reject all of it. The entire thing would just not exist in your head. And I have yet to meet anyone who takes that approach. Well, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in those things. Yeah, I totally get that. But you do have a sense of justice, of the afterlife. No, I don't. I don't believe in angels. I don't believe in demons. I don't believe in the afterlife. Okay, do you believe that the world or the universe will exist after humans? Because if you do, even if you are a very scientific and rational person who rejects the tenets of every religion, as we currently understand religion, even if you reject all of that, by default, you are still aware that the human project will end. This too is apocalyptic thinking. So when we speak of apocalyptic thinking, it's really different concepts of how the world will end, whether it ends with science, whether it ends with fire, whether it ends with ice, whether it ends with Jesus coming back on a white horse. All of these are eligible for apocalyptic thinking. So it's not something to be afraid of. It's not something that we should be like, oh man, we have to look at this verse in the Old Testament to lock up with this verse in the New Testament, and this is what we're seeing in the news headlines today. Yeah, maybe, but also probably not. I don't know about any of that. What I do know for certain, though, is that if you are thinking in any way existentially, congratulations, you are already participating in apocalyptic thinking about the end of the world, about the end of humanity, and ultimately, let's personalize this, the end of yourself. This is the kind of stuff that Jesus is touching into, that Paul will touch into and will say, you got to live a good life now because you can't wait for tomorrow. You can't wait for this future point. You have to do good today. With Jesus especially, Jesus does not really heavily rely on the end of time in his teachings. In fact, when people come to him with those questions, he is more focused on bringing this concept called the kingdom of God to the earth today. Not in the future, but today. He's essentially saying, you're focusing so much on what will happen in the afterlife. Why don't you take that same anxiety and that same frustration and focus it on today? Don't wait to do the good thing. Do the good thing now. Build good stuff now. Build libraries now. Help people now. Love people now. Don't wait until the end of time for some final accounting. Just do the good thing now. Paul will take that theology, will build it up further, and will say, well, do good now, do the kingdom of God now, but do it because you're trying to accumulate something in the afterlife. And then much later, John will take that concept and will play with it some more, and will say, do the good thing now so that you can get to heaven later, and then hopefully you will be rewarded by God in the afterlife with a mansion in glory. You will be part of the community of God in the afterlife, will rule and reign, curious language that, forevermore. So yeah, interesting stuff that. Again, all of this kind of falls under apocalyptic thinking, but Jesus is remarkable in the sense that he is aware of these conversations and says, yes, all of that is good, but still focus on today. Don't get lost in the years and thousands of years down the line. Do the good thing today. And then we can kind of see, even in the Christian scriptures, how this idea will be taken by others, and they are continuing to move it back towards that apocalyptic thinking that really is not as heavily pressing in the ministry and in the teachings of Jesus.